Hi students, today let us see the second part of the lesson tissues. In the previous session we have learned about the plant tissues. In the plant tissue we have learned about only the first type of tissue, which is nothing but meristematic tissue, right? So the meristematic tissues are classified into three based on the part which is present in the plant, like apical meristem, lateral meristem and intercalary meristem. Now let us see the one more type of plant tissue, which is called as non-dividing tissues. This non-dividing tissues is otherwise called as permanent tissues. Yeah. So permanent tissue is nothing but the cell which lost the power of dividing is called permanent. So if the cell is not dividing at all, then it will be called as permanent tissue. Right? So when meristematic tissue divided and reaches the final stage, then it will get maturity. After the meristematic tissue attain maturity, they do not divide anymore. So that will be called as permanent tissues. Right? The process of taking up a permanent shape, size and a function is called as differentiation. So permanent tissues are nothing but matured meristematic tissues. So mainly there are two type of permanent tissues. Let us see that. The two type of permanent tissues are simple and complex. Simple tissue and complex tissue. Now let us see about the simple permanent tissue. So simple permanent tissues are made up of structurally and functionally similar cells. So the cells are in the similar way and it has the simple structure. On the basis of the nature of cells, these simple permanent tissues are further divided into three types, which are called as parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. This parenchyma is also divided into two parts based on the things which is present in it. So let us see that on the next slide. First, let us see about parenchyma. So parenchyma will be otherwise called as filler tissues. Okay, filler, F-I-L-L-E-R, filler tissues. Now, in this parenchyma, para means beside and chyma means tissues. Always which is present in the stem, roots, leaves, flowers and fruits. And it is a living tissue. Living cells. Okay, these cells are living and have large intercellular spaces between them. Its main function is to store and assimilate food. It provides mechanical strength to the plant. Okay, so this is the only thing about parenchyma. So parenchyma is present in the stem, roots, leaves, flowers and fruits, and the main purpose of this is giving mechanical strength to the plant. So this parenchyma is otherwise called as filler tissue. Now, based on the things which is present in that parenchyma, it will be otherwise called as chlorenchyma and aerenchyma. So what do you mean by chlorenchyma? Chlorenchyma is nothing but if chloroplast is present in parenchyma. Chloroplast is nothing but chlorophyll. Okay. If it is present in parenchyma to perform photosynthesis, then it will be called as chlorenchyma. In the same way, in aquatic plants, large cavities or cavities in the sense air cavities, okay, large air cavities are present in parenchyma to give buoyancy to the plant to help them float. So this type of parenchyma is called as aerenchyma. I think you have understood about parenchyma, right? So parenchyma is a filler tissue and it will be present in stem, roots, leaves, flowers and fruits. It gives the mechanical support to this plant and the cells are having large intercellular spaces between it. Okay. So based on the chloroplast present in parenchyma, it was called as chlorenchyma, and because of that air cavities present in parenchyma, it is otherwise called as aerenchyma. Right. Now let us see the second type of simple permanent tissue, which is nothing but collenchyma, right? Yeah. So collenchyma. Cola means glue. Chyma means tissue. It is a kind of living tissue like parenchyma. So parenchyma is also a living tissue and this collenchyma is also one of the living tissue. It is present below the epidermis of the green dicotyledonous stem and leaf stalk. So these are absent in monocot roots, stems and leaves. So the main function of the collenchyma is giving the flexibility to the plant without breaking. It also provides mechanical support to the plant. These cells are circular, oval, elongated longitudinally and irregularly thickened at the corners by the deposition of extra pectin and cellulose. And these cells have very little intercellular space between them. If you see in parenchyma, large intercellular spaces are present, but in the collenchyma only little space is present in between the cells. Okay, so here parenchyma is also a living cell and this collenchyma is also the living tissue, right? Now let us see the third one, which is called as sclerenchyma. So sclerenchyma, sclerose, hard, chyma, tissue. It is a dead simple permanent tissue. So the first two type of simple permanent tissue is a living tissue, but the sclerenchyma is a dead simple permanent tissue, which makes the plant hard and stiff, which will be otherwise called as protector. Okay, so these cells are long, narrow and closely packed without any intercellular spaces. So in parenchyma, large intercellular spaces present. Collenchyma, little intercellular spaces are present, but in the sclerenchyma there is no intercellular spaces at all. Yeah, so where it can occur, these sclerenchyma will occur in stems, roots, veins of leaves and hard covering of seeds and nuts. For example, the husk of coconut is made up of sclerenchyma tissue, right? So the sclerenchyma gives strength and rigidity to the plant body. A number of fibers commercially used as jute, flax and hemp, so these are all called as the type of sclerenchyma things. Okay, so now we have seen about the three simple permanent tissues, which is nothing but parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. So parenchyma is otherwise called as filler tissue, collenchyma is otherwise called as supporter, which can be said as flexibility, and sclerenchyma will be called as a protector, or you can say that as it gives rigidity and strength to the plant. Yeah, so this is what about the first type of permanent tissue, like simple permanent tissue. So simple permanent tissue is classified into three, which is called as parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma. So this parenchyma is further divided into two, which is nothing but chlorenchyma and aerenchyma. Then we have talked about collenchyma and sclerenchyma. Yeah, now let us see about epidermis. Yeah, so epidermis is the very important one. Yeah, so the single layer of cells covering the plant body is called as epidermis. We human need a skin to protect the internal parts, right? So in the same way, plants also require the protective covering to its body. That is what called as epidermis. So do you think all plants will have the same structure and same type of epidermis layer? Actually not. Epidermis gets modified depending upon the habitat and need. Let me ask you a question. What does a plant need which grows in a dry habitat? You know it. Actually, the answer is water, right? So, in those plants, the epidermis forms a thicker layer in order to prevent excess of water loss in a plant. So, in these plants, the thick epidermis contain chemical called cutin, cutin, okay, cutin, which prevent the water loss. In the same way, in terrestrial plants, usually the epidermis cells secrete a waxy secretion. So what about this waxy secretion? Why it is secreted in a plant? So this is only to protect the plants from the parasitic infections and mechanical injuries. Yeah, and to prevent from the water loss. So addition to this, if you observe the roots of a plant, you can see the small numerous hair-like structures. These are the modification of the epidermis cell. which helps in increase the surface area of absorption. Since they form a protective layer that they do not possess intercellular spaces. Also, these cells are very flat and it has thicker outer cell wall. Are you saying that a complete plant has an epidermis layer? Then, how does the gaseous exchange and water vapor occur? Well, the epidermis is clever to leave enough spaces in their pores in its structures. Yes, so these structure of pores we call that as stomata. It formed by the epidermal cells, and guard cells are also present, which is in the shape of kidney, right? So the guard cells regulates the exchange of gases and water vapors from the stomata. We have seen about leaf and root. Now let us talk about the stem. Do you think that a stem have the same epidermis layer that present in roots and leaves? Actually not. The stem of huge trees do not have the proper epidermis layer. The plants which are older, the epidermis is replaced by the secondary meristem, which are usually referred to a thick cork or bark. Cells of these layers are dead and compactly arranged without intercellular spaces. So also find the deposits of suberi. Suberi is nothing but a thing which will be otherwise called as the water resistance, which regulates the gaseous exchange and water loss. Yeah, so we have learned about epidermis, right? Now let us see about the second type of permanent tissue, which is called as complex permanent tissue. Complex permanent tissue is made up of more than one type of cell. So in a simple permanent tissue, we have seen the structures are very simple and the cells are mostly similar. But in the complex tissue, it was made up of more than one type of cell. All these cells coordinate to perform a common function, right? So the good example for complex permanent tissue is nothing but xylem and phloem. They both are conducting tissues and constitute a vascular bundle. Okay, so now let us see about xylem. Xylem consists of tracheids, vessel, xylem parenchyma and a xylem fibers. The cell have thick walls and many of them are dead cells. Tracheids and vessels are tubular structures. This allows them to transport water and minerals vertically, so upward, okay, vertical. Parenchyma stores food and help in the sideways conduction of water. Fibers are mainly supportive in function. Xylem helps in conduction of water and minerals from root to all parts of the shoot. It also provides mechanical support, right? So in this diagram you can able to see the vessels, tracheids and the picture of a xylem tissue, and in the second picture which is given in the left hand side you can able to see how the water is moving vertically, right? So basically in a complex permanent tissue in xylem there are four types of components are present, which is nothing but xylem parenchyma, xylem vessels, tracheids and xylem fibers. Now let us see about the second complex permanent tissue, which is nothing but phloem. Phloem is made up of four type of elements. Those things are sieve tubes, companion cell, phloem fibers and the phloem parenchyma. Sieve tubes are tubular cells with perforated end walls. In phloem, unlike xylem, materials can move in both direction. So in xylem we have seen everything will move only in one way direction in xylem, but in the phloem it will move in both the directions, okay? And phloem cells are living cells, but we have learned in xylem those things are dead cells, but in a phloem it is a living cells, right? Except phloem fibers. So except this phloem fibers, remaining things are living cells. Phloem cells are living cells except phloem fibers. So it transport food from leaves to other parts of the plant. Yeah. So phloem parenchyma helps in storage of food. So each component is doing its own work. So sieve tubes which are having with the perforated end walls, and phloem is unlike xylem, it is passing the things to both the direction. Phloem cells are a living cell and it transport food to the leaf to the other, from the leaf to the other parts of the plant, and phloem parenchyma helps in storage of food. Yeah. In the same way, let us see about the animal tissues, and this is what about the plant tissues. Okay, so until now we have learned about the plant tissues. So plant tissues we have seen dividing tissue and non-dividing tissue. Dividing tissues are nothing but meristematic tissue, and non-dividing tissues are permanent tissue. So permanent tissues are two types, which is simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. In simple permanent tissue, we have learned about parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. In a complex permanent tissue, we have learned about xylem and phloem. Yeah, children. So I hope by seeing the previous session, you started to draw the diagram of that three types of meristem, like apical meristem, intercalary meristem and lateral meristem in your notebook. In the same way, today you just write down the flow chart. Okay, you just draw the flow chart. First write down tissues. It was just divided into two: plant tissue, animal tissue. And plant tissue dividing, non-dividing. Dividing meristematic, so write the four meristematic like apical, lateral and three things intercalary. And go with non-dividing, which is called as permanent, and write that as parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. So the parenchyma is further divided into chlorenchyma and arenchyma, right? So write that. And complex permanent tissue as xylem and phloem. So in xylem you have to mention the four components which is present over there, and in the phloem also you have to mention the four things which is present, four elements which is present under that. Okay, just draw the flow chart for plant tissue alone in your classwork. Okay, that is more than enough. Thank you, children. And you just take your content book and go through the lesson tissues. You just read out. Okay, once if you read out, you will get idea about the tissues as like plant tissues and types and everything. Okay, children, thank you.